Besides, sometimes a woman's intuition is better than a man's brains.
Signing up right for a high. Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
You know, the poor little rich girl.
Well, never rich,
Well,
just
not
poor
that, but, you know, the same
and
time.
And
the
the
woman who
thing
had
is-
everything and yet...
I like making films here. I like working here. I like living here.
By the time Judy Garland reached adulthood, rest was no longer part of her value. What mattered was reliability, continuity, the ability to keep going, no matter the cost. What the public received was reassurance. What remained behind it was exhaustion that never quite found permission to stop. Most people remember Judy Garland as America's sweetheart, bright, dependable, a voice that made uncertainty feel manageable. Those qualities became her image and, eventually, her obligation. This is not a story about collapse or spectacle. It's a story about expectation, about what happens when being needed becomes a role, and usefulness quietly replaces care. When consistency is rewarded more than well-being, because Hollywood didn't just admire Judy Garland. It relied on her. It structured schedules, performances, and decisions around her ability to endure. Support was offered, but only in ways that ensured she could continue. On stage, audiences heard reassurance, a voice that settled rooms and made people feel certain of what they were hearing. Off stage, a different lesson was being reinforced, that stopping felt like interruption, and rest felt like failure. This is how that expectation took shape, and why its weight followed her far longer than the applause ever did. Judy Garland's earliest environment did not draw a clear line between childhood and performance. Music was not something that waited for the end of the day. It existed alongside daily life, shaping routines and expectations in ways that felt ordinary rather than exceptional. From a young age, she was surrounded by adults who responded immediately when she sang. Attention sharpened, conversations paused, and moods lifted. The change was subtle but consistent, and over time it became familiar. No one framed this as responsibility, and no one named it as pressure. It arrived as praise, encouragement, and reassurance that what she was doing mattered. Gradually, Judy began to understand that her presence had an effect. When she performed, things felt organized and calm. When she stopped, the atmosphere shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. Rest was never forbidden, yet it rarely fit into the rhythm of the day. Continuation felt more natural, more welcome. Rehearsal blended into routine, and routine became the structure around which everything else formed. As she grew older, the distinction between being admired and being relied upon slowly blurred. Her talent did not simply impress people, it steadied them. Schedules were adjusted to accommodate her abilities, and decisions were made with her performances in mind. Approval followed output, and attention followed consistency. Judy learned to read these cues without instruction. She sensed when more was expected without being asked and adjusted herself accordingly. This responsiveness was not taught as a skill, but it became one nonetheless. By the time Hollywood entered her life, this way of moving through the world was already established. The industry did not introduce discipline to Judy Garland. It recognized something that was already there. Studio life offered a structure that felt familiar rather than foreign. Clear schedules, defined roles, and expectations that rewarded preparation and consistency. Success followed not because Judy resisted this system, but because she fit seamlessly within it. She arrived ready, learned quickly, and delivered emotion with precision. These qualities were noticed, praised, and reinforced. What took shape during these years was not only professional ability, but an internal rule that quietly guided her. Showing up mattered more than slowing down. Reliability carried more value than uncertainty. Being useful ensured belonging. There was little reason to question this pattern, because it worked. Applause confirmed it. Approval repeated it. Opportunity extended it. Judy Garland did not experience her early rise as something taken from her, but as something that made sense, a continuation of what she had always done. Beneath that success, however, a pattern was forming that left little room for pause, little permission for need, and almost no language for interruption. Long before expectation became visible, it had already been absorbed. As Judy Garland's career advanced, the qualities that had shaped her early life became publicly visible. She was no longer simply talented, she was reliable. In an industry built on uncertainty, that reliability mattered. She arrived prepared and delivered what was expected with remarkable consistency. Directors trusted her, studios scheduled around her, audiences responded to the clarity of her performances, to the sense that her emotions were precise and contained rather than excessive. Over time, this consistency began to define her reputation more than any single role or achievement. Hollywood learned that Judy Garland could be counted on. She did not disrupt schedules. She did not resist structure. She adapted. That adaptability was rewarded, and each reward reinforced the same message. Alignment led to opportunity. Public admiration followed a similar pattern. Audiences did not see her as unpredictable or distant. They saw her as familiar. Her presence felt steady, and that steadiness became part of her appeal. She represented reassurance at a time when reassurance was valuable. The more often she delivered that feeling, the more it became expected. As her visibility increased, her reputation hardened. Praise turned into assumption. The question was no longer whether Judy Garland would meet expectations, but how much she could carry without faltering. The system around her adjusted accordingly, extending responsibilities rather than limits. This stage of her rise did not feel like pressure from the outside. It felt like momentum. Opportunities arrived quickly, often without pause between them. Each success flowed naturally into the next, and stopping rarely seemed necessary or advisable. Continuation was framed as professionalism. What remained largely unexamined was the cost of this consistency. Judy's ability to deliver emotional precision again and again left little room for fluctuation. Uncertainty, hesitation, or withdrawal did not fit the image that had formed around her. Reliability had become her defining trait, and traits that define reputation are difficult to loosen. Hollywood did not question this arrangement because it produced results. Audiences remained devoted. Studios remained confident. The image held. Judy Garland was no longer just performing roles. She was maintaining a standard. In this phase of her life, trust became structural. It shaped how she was scheduled, how she was presented, and how her presence was interpreted. That trust protected her reputation, but it also narrowed the space in which she could exist. When a person becomes synonymous with dependability, deviation carries risk. The expectation to continue quietly replaces the freedom to change. For Judy Garland, this was not a dramatic shift, but a gradual one. Her rise was not marked by conflict, but by alignment, an alignment so complete that it left little room to ask what might happen if the rhythm ever broke. Away from public attention, Judy Garland's life did not unfold in chaos. It unfolded in order. Her private world reflected the same qualities that defined her public reputation: structure, predictability, and careful regulation. What appeared from the outside as balance was sustained through constant internal adjustment. Her days followed rhythms that left little space unaccounted for. Preparation mattered, timing mattered, being ready mattered. These were not enforced through overt control, but through expectation that had long since been absorbed. Judy did not need to be reminded of what was required. She anticipated it. Silence in this world was not emptiness. It was something to be managed. Stillness felt unfinished, as though it interrupted a process that was meant to continue. Movement, rehearsal, and engagement provided stability. They kept the internal atmosphere steady, much like performance once steadied rooms around her. Over time, Judy learned to regulate herself more closely than anyone else could. She monitored her energy, her emotions, her responses. She learned when to give more and when to contain less visible reactions. This was not framed as self-denial, but as professionalism. The ability to maintain composure regardless of internal state was considered strength. What made this private structure particularly enduring was that it rarely drew attention to itself. There were no dramatic confrontations, no visible enforcement. Authority operated quietly through routine and expectation rather than command. Judy's inner rules replaced the need for external ones. Rest existed, but it was conditional. It was something earned after continuation, not something freely available. Pauses were measured, controlled, and often accompanied by an awareness of what waited afterward. The idea of stopping entirely did not fit easily into this internal framework. Relationships, too, were shaped by this pattern. Judy remained attentive to how her presence affected others. She adjusted to maintain harmony, often placing stability ahead of expression. Emotional disruption felt risky, not because it was forbidden, but because it unsettled the carefully maintained order she relied upon. This inner structure offered clarity, but it also carried weight. By managing herself so completely, Judy limited the space in which uncertainty could exist. There was little room for vulnerability that did not serve a function. Feelings were acknowledged internally, but rarely allowed to interrupt the flow of expectation. What appeared as resilience was, in many ways, adaptation. Judy had learned to align herself so closely with what was needed that the distinction between personal desire and external requirement blurred. The private world became a place of constant calibration rather than release. This system worked for a long time because it was efficient. It allowed her to meet demands without visible disruption. It preserved the image others relied upon. But it also required continuous effort, and effort that was rarely recognized because it remained invisible. In this quiet space, Judy Garland did not experience pressure as force. She experienced it as responsibility. The responsibility to continue, to regulate, and to ensure that what she offered to the world remained intact. The structure that protected her reputation also shaped her inner life, leaving her steady, composed, and increasingly bound to the rhythm she had learned never to break. As time passed, the environment around Judy Garland began to change in ways that were subtle at first. The values that had once aligned so neatly with her reliability started to shift. Expectations did not disappear, but they became more conditional. What had once been taken for granted now required visible maintenance. This shift was not announced, and it was not sudden. It arrived through small adjustments, tighter schedules, less patience for hesitation, greater attention to consistency. The same dependability that had defined Judy's reputation was still admired, but it was no longer assumed to be effortless. Visibility increased, and with it came a new kind of awareness. Judy's alignment with expectation was no longer invisible. It was monitored. The room she once stabilized now watched more closely, attentive to whether the rhythm would hold. Trust, which had once functioned as protection, began to feel contingent. It depended on continuation without interruption. The margin for fluctuation narrowed. What had once been flexibility became scrutiny. Judy responded the only way she knew how. She adjusted. She recalibrated her internal structure to meet the changing environment. The instinct to continue did not weaken under pressure. It intensified. Stopping still did not feel like an option. Rest still felt provisional. This period did not bring immediate collapse. It brought awareness. Judy became increasingly conscious of how much depended on her ability to remain aligned. The expectation to perform was no longer only external. It had become part of how she understood herself in relation to the world. Cultural attention played a role in this shift. Audiences began to expect not only consistency, but reassurance that the image they trusted remained intact. The public relationship subtly changed. Admiration became conditional on stability. Affection depended on continuity. Hollywood as a system responded predictably. It did not punish deviation so much as it adjusted access. Opportunities were reframed. Tolerance was measured. The emphasis shifted from support to assessment. This was not presented as correction, but as recalibration. For Judy Garland, the experience was disorienting precisely because it lacked drama. There was no single moment of rupture. Instead, there was a gradual recognition that the rules had changed without being rewritten. The same behaviors were expected, but with less room for variance. In this phase, the weight of expectation became visible. Not as condemnation, but as condition. Judy was still admired, still valued, still needed, but the alignment that once felt mutual now felt fragile. The transition did not break the structure she relied upon, it exposed it. And once exposure occurs, continuation requires even greater effort, because the pressure is no longer abstract, it is observed. What followed did not undo what had come before. The structures that shaped Judy Garland's life did not disappear when circumstances changed. They remained, quieter but intact, continuing to influence how she was seen and how she saw herself. Hollywood preserved what it could easily hold on to. Performances were remembered, images were replayed, the voice endured. These elements fit neatly into history because they required no adjustment. They could be admired without complication. What did not carry forward as easily was the inner effort that sustained that reliability, the constant regulation, the anticipation, the responsibility to remain aligned. These things left no visible record, and so they rarely entered the narrative of her legacy. Judy Garland continued to be associated with familiarity and emotional access. Even as conditions shifted, the expectation that she would provide reassurance lingered. Her image remained tied to what she had always offered: presence, feeling, continuity. This created a quiet imbalance. The system remembered the output, not the cost. The public held on to the comfort she had once delivered, without needing to confront what it required to maintain it. In this way, her reputation stayed intact, while her inner experience remained largely unexamined. Legacy, in this context, became selective. It honored what was visible and repeatable. It set aside what was personal and difficult to contain. Judy Garland's name continued to represent something dependable, even as the conditions that shaped that dependability were left unspoken. What endured was not only her work, but the expectation attached to it. The idea that she was someone who gave freely, consistently, and without disruption. This idea simplified her story, making it easier to remember. But simplification has a cost. It narrows the understanding of who a person was and how they lived. Judy Garland's legacy, as it settled into history, reflected what she had provided to others far more than what she had carried within herself. In this way, her story did not end in disappearance. It ended in preservation. A preservation that kept the image intact, while leaving the weight of expectation where it had always been. Quiet, unseen, and absorbed into the shape of remembrance. Judy Garland's story is often remembered through moments of brilliance, a voice that carried emotion with rare clarity, a presence that felt immediate and familiar. These memories endure because they offer comfort, and comfort is easy to revisit. But beneath those moments lived a quieter truth, not one of spectacle or collapse, but of accumulation. Expectation does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it forms through approval, through reliability, through being the one who keeps things steady. Over time, that role can become indistinguishable from identity. Hollywood did not invent this pattern. It recognized it, rewarded it, and built around it. The system preserves what functions well, and it rarely asks what sustaining that function requires. In this way, admiration can coexist with silence. Judy Garland remained visible because she continued to give. What remained less visible was the effort involved in continuing, the emotional regulation, the responsibility to maintain alignment, the quiet absence of rest. This is why her story matters beyond its era. Not because it shocks, but because it reflects a structure that still exists. One that values dependability over understanding, output over interior life, and continuity over care. Behind familiar smiles, there are often systems at work that remain unnamed. Systems that shape people not through cruelty, but through expectation. And those expectations, once absorbed, rarely announce themselves. If this story changed how you see Judy Garland, consider what other legacies might look different when viewed through this lens. If you'd like to continue exploring the lives that existed behind Hollywood's most carefully maintained images, subscribe to Behind Hollywood Smiles. These stories are not about undoing admiration. They are about understanding what it was built upon.